Hello guys, this is Joshua Zeller, your cultural Catholic. Yeah, I know that I said on my page that I would do Saturday postings, but I decided that Tuesday would be a much better day to do these videos because I spend time with my family on the weekends. I'm back home. You can see another change in venue. This is my living room. Alright, so let's get into the a little bit late week in news. Alright, so last week there was this big stink about Pope Francis planning on giving an encyclical or a teaching, as they're basically understood to be by the Catholic Church, on climate change. And everyone on the right, Bill O'Reilly, Rick Santorum, Sean Hannity, Mike Huckabee, all of them who've been saying religion is super important, backtracked because he was going against what they believed, because he was saying something that actually makes sense. And this Pope has been doing a lot of things that make sense. He's been going after the child molestation, those who've been accused of child molestation, setting up committees to try to find a way to deal with this problem, among many, many other things. And he released this encyclical. I'll have a link to that in the description below. I should warn you, like all encyclicals, they're going to be really, really long. But all of it is basically saying that the countries that have the most power economically and politically, like the United States, the UK, Germany, China, they have a responsibility to not only help countries that are less fortunate than them, like the Dominican Republic, like countries like Haiti, Uruguay, and many other countries that we would consider undeveloped or developing countries, that we have a responsibility to help them as well as to protect the environment, because ultimately it's stated in the Bible and it's believed by Christians and many other religions that we were put on this earth by God or whatever creator being you believe in to be shepherds of the earth, to be the trustees of the earth, to take care of it, to make sure that it's there for everyone to enjoy. And he's basically saying, we need to do this because it's what God wants us to do. Now again, you don't have to believe in God to want to do something for the environment, but because the Pope is a Pope, he's been looking at it through that lens, and ultimately that's how he's making the argument. Now, a big argument for why Republicans are saying he shouldn't say anything on climate change is because he's a clergyman and not a scientist, and thus he should stick with morality and theology. Funny thing, Pope Francis has a master's in chemistry, and he was a chemist working in a lab before he took holy orders and became a priest. So while he didn't study climatology, I'm pretty sure he's a scientist, and I'm pretty sure he knows what he's talking about. So you should all shut up and listen to what he has to say, because even if you may not believe in God or whatever, he's still saying something important. Alright, so that was our Catholic story for the day. The New York Times on June 13th had a very, very interesting op-ed that actually Bill O'Reilly last week on Tuesday kind of attacked because he was cited in it. The op-ed was by Nicholas Kristof, and he was talking about the narrative on poverty. People on the right are saying that it's all about your choices, the things that you decided to do. You're poor because you decided to do drugs, you decided that you chose to live in a poor neighborhood, you chose to join a gang, things like that. Everything that's wrong with your life is 100% your fault. And liberals tend to argue that it's the system that is making things hard for you. That is, because of how the legal system was set up, with the zero tolerance, the mandatory minimums, things like that, you are automatically required, you are automatically, through the system, downtrodden and forced into poverty. Christoph kind of melds the 2 points, trying to say that it's a lot more complex than the right and the left are saying. Now, I'm not saying that either one is either one is right. Actually, that's what he's saying. And what I would say that the left's idea, the liberals' idea on why poverty is the way it is because of the system, I think that's a little bit more complex than the Republican side. But Christoph argues that it's the system, the way the system is set up, that kind of sets it up for the problems. And then choice does play a part in it, in that because you have this system that's basically crushing you, you tend to make poorer decisions. So if you have a horrible job and you live in a horrible neighborhood with a lot of violence, you may tend to try to find ways to escape, like drugs and alcohol. And you make the choice to use those substances instead of instead of trying to find a way to get out of it, because of the stress that is causing you to make poor decisions. So it does a nice melding of the two. He brings in quite a few psychological studies, and he also points out that it's your fault narrative, the fact that the choices you made are what put you in your situation. He points out that that's actually seeped into the African American community, which is largely the target of this "it's your fault" narrative. It's your own fault that you're in poverty narrative. And so that's really actually quite troubling. So if we could find a way to get Christoph's idea out and not just blatantly let Republicans and conservative pundits like Bill O'Reilly set the narrative, we ultimately will be able to find a way to get out of the problems that we ultimately have created through both creating the system that ultimately leads to the choices that are made. And if we're able to do that, we'll be able to improve our country by making everyone else's lives a lot better. And while I was watching Bill O'Reilly's show, I was watching with my dad because we're both fairly liberal. I'm a little bit more than he is. But we were watching it to understand what their argument is, and ultimately to be better capable of arguing against their position. He brought up how there was a teacher named Dana Dusbiber, and she doesn't teach Shakespeare in her English classes. She brings in the argument that her students are minorities and ethnically diverse, and she doesn't feel that it adequately applies to their experience. So she likes to bring in traditional African literature and other things to kind of get the same point across, because she argues that you can get the same ideas from these other literary sources and still have the same message. And I completely agree. We don't have to teach Shakespeare to understand jealousy or betrayal or any of the other important themes that Shakespeare brought in. There was an argument in response to Miss Dusbiber's argument. This was a teacher named Matthew Truesdale, and he kind of said that it's not always that it wasn't a good idea to just flat out cut out Shakespeare. He argued that you could bring in both the alternate forms of the alternative literary options, your Native American literature, your African literature, your Pacific Islander literature, everything else that could apply to different groups of individuals. But you could still keep Shakespeare. And I kind of agree with his argument. because, yeah, Shakespeare is hard to understand. It's part of this Eurocentric curriculum that we've set up for our English classes, but it still does allow us to understand human nature just as much as these other forms of literature. Now, on O'Reilly's show, he was saying it's absurd. Gutfeld, who attempts or claims to be a satirist, said just say Shakespeare's black. Everyone else is doing it. He was doing this. He was referring to Rachel Dolezal, a former NAACP chapter president who claimed she was black even though she was clearly white. But anyways, their arguments seemed very pedantic and very defensive of this very Eurocentric curriculum that we do have. And I think we do need to completely change the curriculum that we have set up, because yes, European literature is important to this country because, I don't mean to sound ethnocentric or anything, but the United States, as we know it today, was made only possible through European interaction. And so it is important to use European and white literature in our English classes, but we do also need to bring in other literature from around the world that teaches the same lessons and better represents this very ethnically diverse country that we have. And so I completely understand both arguments. I'll have them both posted. They were prefaced by the Washington Post education columnist Valerie Strauss. They're both on the Washington Post. They're both actually very good arguments, and you should definitely check them out. We're going to keep rolling with the United States. We're actually going to do more U.S. stories than international stories. The Politico on the 16th reported very interesting polling results in New Hampshire. Quote, most political observers felt that Hillary Clinton's large early lead among Democratic voters would eventually shrink a bit over time, said David Paleologos, director of the Suffolk University Political Research Center in Boston. But in New Hampshire right now, the lead has shrunk a lot. And this is a much different Democratic primary race than we are seeing in other states so far. And this is in reference to Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton has been seen as this massive juggernaut, and every political pundit is saying, and everyone in the mainstream news is saying, I'm using that term in that the corporate mainstream, not the mainstream lamestream that the Tea Party uses. They've been saying that Hillary Clinton has this nomination down pat already. It's just a formality to go through these nominations. But she has a 47%, she has a 41% of vote, likely Democratic primary voters saying that they will vote for her. This is, in comparison to Bernie Sanders, 31%. Now, this is among likely voters, all of them. It doesn't matter if they know about both candidates or just one. That doesn't seem like a lot, but it's actually very important because Hillary Clinton has had not 10% more than everyone else, but 20, 30, 40, sometimes even 50 or 60% more than any of the other possible contenders. And this has been going on for months. And what's even more telling is among people who were asked who knew of both candidates, the advantage that Clinton has over Bernie Sanders is 3%. It's 38 to 35. I ardently support Bernie Sanders. He's not having his campaign funded by billionaires or super PACs. I recently donated. Everyone who watches this should donate to Bernie Sanders. He's actually trying to help this country. He wants to do things that help everyone, not just the rich. And this could be a very good sign for him in the future, because in Iowa he's been predicting to have 200, 300 people in his rallies. He's had over 500 consistently. He's had more people show up than has been anticipated. And a lot of the corporate news outlets are saying that Bernie Sanders is just a flash in the pan. That he is one of those candidates who's pushing people on the Democratic side, like Hillary, farther to the left. I disagree. He has the makings to be a real threat to Hillary Clinton, and we seriously need to support him because he has very good ideas, and these are ideas that the European countries have put into play, and it's absurd that we, as the quote-unquote most free country in the world and the greatest democracy in the world, haven't implemented. The final domestic story is actually quite a bit of a downer. A couple of weeks ago, there was a shooting in Iowa. A man named Alex Kozak, who was a open carry advocate, so he was one of those nut jobs who walked around with a gun, had been sexually harassing a 20-year-old woman at his work because he was a security guard at a mall, which is where the shooting took place. And he was fired because she had complained, rightly so, because she felt uncomfortable, a little bit threatened. And he decided it'd be a good idea to take out his anger on her by going back and shooting her in the back 3 times. So this gun-carrying, Second Amendment-loving, married man who was making sexual advances on a much younger 20-year-old girl was too cowardly to shoot her where she can see him. He shot her in the back. Now, shooting her at all is cowardly, but shooting her in the back is just so blatantly cowardly. And as Ross Story reported on the 15th, men's rights activists, at least those who are extremely insane, are saying it's her fault. It's her fault because she didn't accept his sexual advances, because that's what women apparently are supposed to do. One man posted, as Ross Story reported, quote, "Society is churning out weak men with no masculine guidance by the truckload. Add to that social ramifications of unrestrained and optimized hypergamy. You get what you get is men with nowhere to turn. The masculine energy will express itself in destructive ways if it is not channeled properly. There's going to be a lot more Elliot Rodgers coming down the pike." Now, in this case, the guy apparently wasn't an incel, but I would be willing to bet that his murderous rage came from, at least in part, sexual frustration coupled by losing his job. Basically, these guys are blaming everything else. The fact that she didn't accept his advances, the fact that he's a quote-unquote beta male, even though he had a wife and was probably having sex with her quite regularly. These alpha males, who probably aren't having sex at all, are blaming everything else but Kozak. Now, I'll admit, I've had sex a few times, and I'm the definition of a beta male. And even I think these guys are being completely irrational. So we really need to find a way to get over the fact that we need a men's rights activist movement. I don't really think men need rights movement, because white men run this country. We have the power. So I don't need people arguing for my rights. Not at all. And the final story comes from Vice News. Vice News is a very good source. I would recommend it to everyone who watches this show. And you should recommend it to your friends. And you should recommend this show to your friends. Anyways, Simon Ostrovsky, who has been doing a lot of good work in the Ukrainian crisis right now, decided to follow a Russian soldier who had been in Ukraine and who had posted his involvement in Ukraine on a Russian social media site called VK. And this man was a Russian soldier who had assisted in taking a very strategic town in Ukraine. Thing is, he's ethnically Asian. He's from a Mongol. He's from a Mongol group. I don't remember exactly what it is. I'll have the video, the Vice News piece, both the video and the article posted in the description below. But he was a man from Siberia who showed up in Ukraine, as well as his unit. And Asian people typically don't live in Ukraine, aren't from the Donetsk region or the Luhansk region, which are both the separatist parts of Ukraine. And it's basically showing that Russia isn't only supplying them arms, they're supplying an army for the separatists, because the separatists are kind of getting their butts handed to them. And Russia really, really wants those regions, and I'm sure Putin wants to just steamroll through all of Ukraine and take it back for the glory of Mother Russia. And to do that, he needs to have a plausible reason to do so, and he needs the separatist zones to have a fairly strategic advantage and a very good launching point for his forces to just steamroll through Ukraine. And to do so, he needs to send in his troops, and they did beyond the obvious fact that they didn't look like they were from Ukraine. They did a decent job by having them wear armbands, basically hiding their Russian insignias. But these are Russian soldiers, and they posted it to their social media site. And Ostrovsky noted that they didn't turn off their GPS locators for when they posted the photos. And one of the photos that was posted with this soldier that he followed was in one of those massive camps that they're building, that they built on the border of Ukraine. That is a launch point to send Russian soldiers into Ukraine to fight for the separatists. And then when Simon confronted this soldier that he'd been following, he's saying, "No, it's not me." And he's clearly been told to say, if any foreign news organizations ask you what's going on, you are to deny out your ass. Sorry for swearing. I kind of had a silent agreement with made a silent decision to not really swear too often or at all, but this kind of called for it. So yeah, this is the week. Again, I'm going to be recording on and posting on Tuesdays now. So this is Joshua Zeller, your cultural Catholic, signing off.